Chapter 2. The Little Funker. I was named after one of my mother's favorite characters from the funnies, Terry from Terry and the Pirates. Dory Jr., or Dunk, as we used to call him, think about it, always said the first time he saw me, he thought I looked like a gangly little chicken. Later on, as we grew up, he would threaten to beat the hell out of me for one of the many reasons I gave him to do so. I ran like a chicken, but I never thought I looked like a chicken. My mother spent the first 3 months of my life in the hospital, with peritonitis caused by a small piece of placenta remaining in the womb. My brother and I stayed with her family. My father island hopped until the war was over, and then came back to Chicago and to his family. He tried to get his job back with Pullman Standard, but they weren't hiring. There were no more tanks to be built. He knew he needed money to feed his family, so he decided to try wrestling full-time. By now a new local promoter was running Hammond for Kohler, a man named Bach Estes. Bach was also a wrestler. In fact, he and his brothers, Toots and Kick, were all in the business, and were all full-blooded Indians out of Elk City, Oklahoma. That little state put out some of the toughest amateurs in the country, and it still does. Bach was one of those tough amateurs, and when he first met my father, he said, "So, you're the guy who's supposed to be so tough." My father made no bones about it. He wasn't afraid of anyone, and certainly not Bach Estes, so Dory took Bach up on his offer to go to the gym the next day to see who was toughest. That was the way things were done in the profession at that time. Two tough guys would go to the gym, more than likely alone with no onlookers. Who won and what happened was the wrestler's business, and sometimes never mentioned again. Shortly before his death in July 2004, I tracked down Bach, by then 87, at his home in Oklahoma. I asked him what happened that day. He said, "Dory took me down and hooked me in a top body scissors and facelock, but after several minutes, I got away. We wrestled about 10 more minutes with neither one getting the advantage, and then we both called it quits." In my heart, I believed my father hooked Estes and crossed his face. I don't think Bach ever escaped, because with what I know about wrestling, I know that he would have had to have superhuman strength and the ability to withstand a hell of a lot of pain to get out of that hold. Of course, I also thought if I were to Bach Estes and Dory Funk were dead, I might tell a similar story, instead of one where I got my ass hooked. As Ray Stevens, a legendary wrestler and a longtime friend, once told me, if it's worth telling, it's worth coloring up a bit. And that, in a nutshell, is the wrestling business. Whatever happened doesn't matter, because that day at the gym was the start of a lifelong friendship for Bach and Dory. Bach decided it would be best for Dory to go to another wrestling area to get some ring experience. He talked to Toledo promoter Cliff Maupin and told him he had a green boy named Funk who needed some experience. Maupin said, "Funk? Goddamn. That sounds downright nasty. How the hell can he draw a buck with a name like Funk?" Bach said he didn't care what Maupin called him, and Maupin eventually agreed to use him and even let him use his name. They borrowed a house trailer from my Aunt Dorothy and enough money for a used Oldsmobile. The Funk family was ready for the road. I never really thought about us being nomads. It was just a way of life, traveling around and living in the trailer parks. At the time, that old trailer didn't seem small to me. Heck, even the back window of our Oldsmobile seemed big. I remember crawling up in the space between the rear window and the back seat and riding for hours down the road. I always liked it best when we were traveling at night. Mom would make Dory Jr. a bed on the back seat with blankets and a pillow, and then fix me up a bed in that little rear window nook. We would listen to the radio for hours as we drove across the country. I loved the life of Riley, but the shadow scared the devil out of me. Wrestlers in the late 1940s were like a bunch of gypsies roving vagabonds traveling throughout the country. We stayed at a trailer park in towns that were centrally located to the towns the promoter ran, as did a lot of other wrestlers' families, and we bonded with a lot of them. It was immediate acceptance with the other wrestlers' families. The kids stuck together, and the families did, too. It was much more of a circus atmosphere than what you might imagine, not as far as how they earned their money, but in the way of life. It was close to what the circus or carny's way of life was. You'd go into a territory, stay 3 or 4 months, or as long as you could, and then move on to your next territory. In those trailer courts, we were all part of a big, extended family. I believe a lot of it was that we had common enemies. We might fight with each other, but we could come together against the people who called wrestling fake or phony. On weekends they would have get-togethers with plenty of beer and all the food everyone could eat. I never knew a wrestler or a wrestler's wife who couldn't make one hell of a meal. Looking back, I guess that 30-foot trailer was a little small for a family of 4, but it was home. My mother decorated the room Dory and I shared with paper stars that glowed in the dark. At night we said our prayers, and she kissed us goodnight. Then she turned off the lights, and the moment she did, the stars would glow. We were among the heavens, or at least we thought we were. You talk about neat. For years, it seemed like the Trudells were always in the same territory as us. Benny and his wife, Lil, had 4 children, 3 beautiful girls and a boy. After seeing all of them packed into their trailer, I realized ours really wasn't so crowded. They were from Montreal and originally spoke only French, but the kids picked up English fast. As for their parents, well, Benny did okay, but Lil brutalized the language and could not have cared less. All that mattered to Lil was that her husband was okay and her kids, too. Benny was never really a great wrestler, but he was hard-nosed and pretty tough, pound for pound. He would fight for the wrestling business at the drop of a hat, but at 5'8" and with a pot belly, promoters would never let him be a main eventer. Like most of the wrestlers I've known through the years, Benny was hooked on the business. He doubled sometimes as a referee but just knew that if he had the right gimmick, he could make his fortune in wrestling. Wrestling in the late 1940s and 1950s was a 6-night-a-week occupation. No promoter would chance working on Sunday, or it would have been 7, but the guys wanted the day of rest to be with their families. Driving to a different town every night could get monotonous, and good traveling companions were necessary. For my dad, Benny was the perfect companion, I believe, because he thought everything Dory did was grand, and thought everything Dory said was hilarious. Looking back, I guess he was living vicariously through my father. My father worked in the Ohio, Florida, Oklahoma and Arizona territories before returning to Ohio for a second run under promoter Al Haft. Soon after we got there, promoter Maupin announced they were bringing in the heavyweights. Anything over 205 pounds was considered a heavyweight. At 190 pounds, soaking wet, Dad was a junior heavyweight, and he saw the writing on the wall. He was out, and the big guys were in. He gave his notice, and we were off to Texas. By 19, Mom and Dad were thinking about putting some roots down. Junior was in school now, but it was difficult for him. Moving from territory to territory, he had to change teachers and friends a couple of times a year, even though he usually did well and was an exceptional student. My parents wanted a home and some stability, like other families had. I wasn't yet at school age, so it wasn't as hard for me as it was for my brother. He and I were like all brothers, I guess. We loved each other to death and hated each other, too, sometimes. We would get into terrible fights, and I usually got the worst end of it. My mom would stop it by hitting us over the head with a newspaper. For some reason, we were just like dogs. When the dog pisses in the house, you hit him with a newspaper, and that's what she did. Boy, we were scared to death of that newspaper. For some reason, hitting us with a newspaper was the worst thing she could do to us. Our house had a kitchen with 2 doors leading to it on opposite ends and an island counter in the middle. Traffic would go in one door, around the island and out. It was almost like a circle. One time, when my brother and I got into a big argument, I said something that would turn it into a fight, as I often did. But it was only going to be a fight if he could catch me. I took off with the idea I would try to get enough of a lead on him that I could make it to the bathroom and lock myself in before he could get to me. It was a great plan, except for one thing: I would also have to make it through the kitchen, where my mother was ready to spring into action with her newspaper, rolled and taped up. I tell you, all she had to do after a while was take that newspaper out, and Junior and I would calm down as soon as we saw it. She had us trained, just like dogs. It was always evident that my brother and I had different personalities. Junior would operate behind the scenes, while I was just goofy enough to try anything. One time, he said, "Hey, Terry, I have an idea." "What's that, Junior?" "I think you'd be able to run really fast if we tied a piece of plywood to your back." So that's what we did. Well, the wind was blowing about 40 miles an hour that day. We found a large piece of plywood to put around my arms and tied me to it. I picked up a lot of speed, as I recall, but soon became the world's first man tumble board. Junior was the quiet one, but he was the one with all the ideas. My dad was the same way. He always had stuff for me to do. We had a skunk named Stinky. It had had its scent glands removed, but at some point, Stinky ran away, so we went out looking. Soon enough, my dad spotted a skunk and said, "Terry, there's Stinky." "Dad, I don't think that's Stinky." "God damn it, that's Stinky. Look how tame he is. Get out there and get him." So I went out there and got sprayed by the skunk. It sure was stinky, but it wasn't Stinky. We lived for a while in the trailer court with the other wrestlers' families, but then my father got a job as superintendent at the boys' ranch under Cal Farley, who was also a professional wrestler. Dory Sr. ran the entire thing for all 140-plus kids out there. He dealt with all their problems. Nowadays, you have to go through a tremendous amount of litigation to get a child to a place like that. Back then, they'd get a call from the sheriff, or sometimes even from out of state, with someone saying, "Hey, I have a boy for you here. He's a problem child, his parents aren't around, and he needs a place to live." My dad would say, "All right. Bring him out." The boys were anywhere from 6 to 18 years old. Dad would work at the ranch all day and then occasionally wrestle at night. As a child, I thought Dad was out there fighting for his life. Even though I knew that they knew each other, I never once questioned that their matches were real. I truly believed. I would go to the arena and bawl every Thursday night, terribly upset, the way my kids would years later, when they saw me getting beaten up. And I had fight after fight at school, defending it all my young life. One time, a kid told me my dad was a phony, so I asked him what his dad did. "He's a doctor." "Well," I said, "what does he do? Give people sugar pills?" "I bet your daddy gives them sugar pills. He's not a real doctor." Sometimes, that kind of response was sufficient. If it wasn't, we'd get down to business. But I'm very glad it was presented to me that way. It made me respect my profession much more. It made me have a lot of admiration for the guys who were in it, and it impressed on me that it was not easy. It never has been easy, and I kept that with me. Over my career, there was just a handful who I smartened up to the business. Once you enter into the profession, you're in the fraternity. When I was 14 or 15 years old, my father smartened me up. I don't think believing in it for so long did me any psychological damage. I think his waiting so long to smarten me up helped me to appreciate what a special thing it was to be smartened up in that day and age. After he told me what the truth was, I continued to defend it as a shoot, because I understood it was necessary to present it as a shoot, especially in this area and at that time, because of the small populations of the areas and the number of performances they had to do. If it wasn't looked at as a shoot, they wouldn't be doing much business. Wrestling wasn't the circus coming to town, it was a weekly pastime. I first saw how seriously my dad took protecting the business when I was 5 years old. We were on our way home from the matches and stopped off at Joe Bernarski's, a steakhouse in Amarillo belonging to and named after an old-time wrestler. I was sitting at one of the tables with my brother, who was 9. My parents were at another table, sitting and talking to some other people. This man came over from another table and sat down next to me. "So," he said, "you're Dory Funk's son?" "Yes, sir." Then he started asking me questions about wrestling, questions he really shouldn't have been asking me. He should have been asking my father. Finally, he said, "Come on, you can tell me about this wrestling and how it all works. It must be all fake, right?" My brother got up, got my father and told him what this guy was saying, and that was one of the first times I remember seeing someone truly get the shit beaten out of them. A few years later, we owned a public swimming pool called Gem Lake Swimming Pool, and my father had mats on the roof so some of the guys could work out up there. One day, my father and Bob Geigel, a tough wrestler from Kansas City, were working out up there, and I mean truly working out, truly wrestling. While they were up there, this guy came onto the roof with them and said, "Hey, I think I can do that. Isn't all this wrestling phony?" My dad said, "Is that right?" My dad untangled himself from Geigel and beat the shit out of the guy. The guy took off running and jumped off the roof. He was trying to catch onto a tree that was about 20 feet from the building, but he missed. I think he ended up okay, but he spent a little time in the hospital. When I got into wrestling years later, I took very seriously the idea of protecting the business, and I had a number of confrontations over that very thing. None of these confrontations ever started with me deciding I just wanted to punch someone out. Someone would tell me how phony my business was, and my answer was always, "Well, I'll show you it's not." And I did just like my dad did. A lot of times, it was just easier to just shoot it on a guy, take him down and make him look like an ass. One night, I was in a bar in Amarillo, talking with my wife, Vicky. A man came up to the table where we were sitting and asked her to dance. I said, "Sir, would you mind waiting a little bit? I'm talking to her right now." He said, "Terry Funk." I said I was, and he put out his hand. I put my hand out to shake, but he grabbed my hand and started squeezing as hard as he could. He was about 300 pounds, not the most solid guy in the world, not a monster with muscles, but he was big. I was trying not to register it, but his squeezing was hurting like hell. I reared back with my left hand and slapped the shit out of him. A diamond ring I had just bought, and was really proud of, flew off my hand, and he went down to the floor. Now, this bar's tables were made of iron, including the one where we were sitting. They were very heavy, and after the big man fell to the floor, he grabbed one of the tables with both arms. I reached down to pick him up by his pants, and as I tried to lift him, his pants ripped right off of him and his underwear, too. I was looking down at his bare, fat ass. I thought, shit, I might as well, and so I dove down and bit a chunk out of his ass, And that was the end of that. Until the next day, when he sued me. I ended up settling out of court for $750. It was the most expensive piece of ass I ever had. As I said, my father was violent at times, but other times, he was the softest person in the world. Laura Fishbaker was a girl from Umbarger, Texas, who had leukemia. She was 11 years old, and she was going to die. My father wasn't a rich man at this time, or ever, for that matter, but he took $1,000 of his own money and put it into a checking account in her name to let her buy anything she wanted to for herself. She wasn't related to us. That was just the kind of guy he was. It was nice to stay put, not to have to go somewhere else and start anew. As I'd said, though, my brother Dory was the one who endured switching schools so many times. I started first grade at the boys' ranch where my father worked as superintendent. I would like to add that I received an award that year for being the best speller in the class. Of course, I was the only first grader at boys' ranch, and they had a rule that each class got at least one award. My dad didn't show any favoritism to me, even though I was his son. The first fight I ever got into there was when I was 6, and I got into it with a kid named Dickie Harp, who was 2 or 3 years older than me. He was a tough kid, but when I got up from my seat at the mess hall during lunch one day, I came back, and he was in my seat, so I snuck up behind him and put the first illegal hold I guess I ever used on him. He grabbed him from behind, put both fingers in his mouth and pulled back as hard as I could. Come to think of it, I guess I invented the dastardly fish hook. Anyway, he was screaming and hollering, and my father came over, yelling, all right, what's going on over here?" Dickie wasn't doing anything, so I was feeling pretty good, like a tough guy. "Dickie," my father said, "what's the deal here?" "Mr. Funk," Terry grabbed me from behind and pulled me down, Dickie said. "Well, why didn't you fight him?" "Well, I didn't want to, Mr. Funk. That's your son. I thought I'd get in trouble." "That's okay, Dickie, you go on ahead." In addition to being my first fight, that was also my first loss, because Dickie beat the shit out of me. Every Thursday night, my dad would take the boys from the ranch to the matches. Each week, there'd be a bus out there to bring the kids to the arena, where we had our own roped-off area to sit in. I went every week, but not everyone could. It wasn't an automatic deal, it was a treat. It was a good incentive for them, which they needed, because this wasn't exactly a bunch of good kids living out at the boys' ranch. There were some rough, troubled kids there. One kid, Roger Landing, is probably worth a book all by himself. Roger was 10 years old and very street smart. Roger would sneak onto airplanes parked at the airport because they didn't have any of the security like they do now, and he'd get on the radio and start calling, "Mayday! Mayday!" Roger didn't have any parents or anyone who gave a shit about him, so sometimes he'd just go to a motel at night, find an unlocked room, go in and crawl into bed right with the guy in the room. In the morning, the guy would wake up, look at Roger and say, "What the hell are you doing here?" Roger would say, "Well, you brought me here." One day at the ranch, after weeks of Roger on his best behavior, really, he was conning my father made the big mistake of telling Roger, "Take my car keys down to my wife at the office." "Yes, sir, Mr. Funk." And that was the last my father's new Cutlass 88 was seen in one piece. Roger took off in that car, and Dad got a call from the neighbors a little while later. "Dory," they said, "your car just went by, and it was Roger behind the wheel, going about 80. About another mile up the road, he flipped it 3 times, and when my father got to him he said, "Roger, what the hell are you doing?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Funk, but I didn't want to run your battery down, so I shut the engine off." The damn thing was totaled, but at least Roger saved the battery. I was 4 years old out there, running around with kids who were in their teens. I thought they were my friends. Hell, I thought I was just one of the guys, so they'd have me stealing cigarettes. So there I was, 4 years old, smoking stolen cigarettes. I didn't know any better. They didn't have any cigarettes on the ranch. Anyone my father caught smoking, he'd take to the gym. He'd make them drink a glass of warm milk, and then roll around on the gym floor until they puked. I took a pack at a time of my father's, sliding the rest of the carton down, like they were all still there. Well, it only took my father a couple of times for him to figure out something funny was going on. He finally caught me stealing his cigarettes, so he took me outside where there was a big bell. He rang the bell, which meant everyone had to come running. All 140 kids came running. He knew all the kids liked me, so he had everyone gather around, and he said, "I caught Terry stealing cigarettes. Now, Terry, climb up on this stepladder." I climbed up on the stepladder he had set up out there. "Now, pull down your pants." I pulled down my pants, and he pulled off his belt and beat my ass in front of 140 kids. Then he said, "If you want Terry to get his ass beat like that again, you just go on and have him steal cigarettes for you again." Well, nobody asked me to do that again. They liked me and they loved him. Dory Jr. had a few scrapes at the ranch, too. My brother was on a woodpile once, just playing, and there was also a beehive near the pile. I don't know if he touched the hive or what happened, but those bees went crazy after him. He had bees buzzing all around him, stinging him, and one even made it up his pants and stung him 13 times on the end of his pecker. Well, naturally his pecker swelled up and looked like a gnarled tree limb. Now, my parents used to have the boys' ranch teachers up to the house in the morning for coffee. Dad's favorite deal became to show his boy's disfigured pecker to everyone who came by the house in the morning. "Junior," he'd yell, "come here." My brother would come into the room, and my dad would say, "Show 'em where the bee bit you." "Dad, I don't want to show them." "Damn it, show them where the bee got you, boy." So Junior would unzip his pants and pull out this naughty, horrible-looking thing that used to be his little pecker, and those women would scream in horror. I'm surprised Junior didn't end up with a lifelong complex about bees because of that. My father also coached the boys' ranch football team. One time, not long after he got there, he brought his brother-in-law, Jack Thornton, to a game. Jack, who was married to my mother's sister, Eleanor, was only about 5 years younger than my dad, about 130 pounds and 25 years old. He was balding, though. The boys' ranch hadn't won a game since 2 years before my father started there. They just didn't have many boys, and all the boys had to go out for wrestling, but they didn't have to go out for football. My dad's thinking was, if you're too small he could put you in another weight class to wrestle, but if you're too small for football, you couldn't participate. On this day, the boys' ranch was ahead by 20 points. It was the first game they were going to win in years. But they had injury after injury, and pretty soon, they were down to 10 players. My father had to weigh things now. On one hand, he didn't want to cheat. On the other, it was really important that these kids win for their self-esteem. He got a football helmet and put it on my uncle's bald head and put baling wire for a chin strap so it would stay on. He told Jack not to run the score up, just to keep it close, and that's what he did. The boys' ranch finally got its win. Don't ask me why, because my dad was really hard on those boys, but I swear, when he finally left that place in 1951, there wasn't a dry eye at the ranch. Leaving was pretty hard for me, too, because I had made all kinds of friends at the ranch, from the other kids there to the adults working at the place. At one point, after my dad left Boys Ranch, he got into a disagreement with Dory Dedden, which resulted in us leaving the territory for a while. We headed north, far north. My father wrestled under a mask during one stretch in Vancouver, British Columbia, working for promoter Rod Fenton. That was actually where the Double Cross Ranch name came from. My father wrestled as the Outlaw and was billed as being from the Double Cross Ranch. It was a great name because it had that double meaning, both as a brand, 2XS side by side, and in the sense that the outlaw would double-cross you. It's a name that stuck with me. I've lived on the parcel of land known today as the Double Cross Ranch, yes, it's a real place, for 27 years. These days when I go to church, I tell people it represents 2 crosses. The 2 Dorys eventually worked things out, but we ended up spending a lot of our summers in other areas. We went to North Bay, Ontario, Canada, where my dad wrestled the Vacans, Mad Dog Maurice and Paul the Butcher. As ugly as those guys were, believe it or not, they were the babyfaces against the mean roughneck from Texas. And that feud drew well. The town had about 25,000 people living in it, and the matches drew 3,500. Sometimes it drew too well. My father would get the fans so fired up that riots would break out in the arenas until they played God Save the Queen over the PA system. When the song started, the fans would stop throwing stuff and would stand at attention, which allowed my father a chance to make his escape out the back. This worked for 3 or 4 weeks, but those fans finally got tired of it, said, "Piss on the Queen," and just kept rioting. This was the first time I ever saw my father work as a heel, and it was before my father smartened me up to the business. But I never questioned why he was now being a bad guy. We were from Texas, and we thought our home was better than Ontario, Canada. It made perfect sense to me. Canada was a real experience, but I was glad when the 2 Dorys patched things up and we got to come back home. Not long after, my dad ended up as part owner of the territory. Doc Sarpolis, a booker and promoter, had come in and bought the Amarillo territory in 1956 from Dory Dedden for $75,000, which was a tremendous amount of money. Sarpolis then offered my father a chance to buy in, and so Dory Funk Sr. became part owner of the Amarillo wrestling promotion. 1956 was also the year I met the love of my life. Vicky and I had gone to different elementary schools in Canyon, but were in the same middle school together. I always thought she was pretty great, but we were really just friends until high school, when we started dating. On a couple of nights, this very rules-oriented father of mine would spend his nights wrestling under no rules in a Texas death match. I think my father invented the death match. I never heard of anyone doing them before he did. These were violent matches where there were no disqualifications and no countouts. In fact, even pinfalls didn't count. If one wrestler pinned the other, there was a 30-second rest period, followed by a referee's 10 count. The match only ended when one man could not answer that last count. One of the most successful feuds in Amarillo in the early 1960s was when my father battled Iron Mike DiBiase for the right to be called King of the Death Match. Their first death match went about 30 falls, well over the 3-hour mark, without a winner. They called a curfew at 1 a.m. and they both went for hardways, where wrestlers are truly busted open, usually from punches to the head, in the match, so they both had to go to the hospital to get stitched up afterward. That's just the way things were done for believability and to make things intense, which helped the business. You open the sports page the day after a guy went hardway, and there was his picture, with a head looking like a melon. What would you think about the believability of what that guy was doing? A lot of times they'd do a hardway if they had a bunch of smartasses in the front rows, yelling, "It's all bullshit." We'd go right out in front of them and let them see someone getting punched right in the face. It would keep them wondering if it was real or not. I've done hardways on other guys before, and I've had them done to me. Both my dad and Mike had black eyes and busted mouths after the match, and naturally, after getting out of the hospital with his stitches, my dad was exhausted. Over the next few months my father wrestled DiBiase just a few times, usually in tag matches, to build interest in the rematch. The amazing thing was they came back a year after that first death match and did a rematch for the anniversary. The entire card was the Texas death match and a standby match, only 4 people on the card. It sold out. I don't want to be one of these old-timers saying everything in my day was a sellout, but they really did have people lined up outside trying to get in to see this and getting turned away. And the standby match didn't even go. They just had 2 guys dressed in their gear, just standing by like they were ready to go. Hell, they knew they weren't going on, so they weren't really even standing by, and they still got a payoff. Now, that's a hell of a deal. My father won the Texas Death rematch with DiBiase, but that one also went long, more than 90 minutes. My father also wrestled the original Gorgeous George. George Wagner was the original, bleached, flamboyant pretty boy wrestler, and they wrestled in Dick Bivens Stadium in Amarillo. The match drew 7,000 people, which was more than 10% of the number of people living in the area at the time. Even though we were based in Amarillo now, my father still wrestled outside the area occasionally. He was never the biggest wrestler, but he was a tough guy, and people knew it. In the late 1950s, there was a wrestling war between Houston promoter Morris Siegel and Ed McLemore, from the Dallas area. They would line their cards with shooters to protect themselves, because you never knew in that situation if someone from the opposition would come in and challenge your guys some night to make your wrestlers look like fools. Morris brought in my father, Ricky Starr and Ray Gunkel as his shooters, and those guys could damn well shoot. At that time, Dad was making $500 a week, which was huge money in those days. Another one of my father's big feuds was with Frankie Hill Murdoch. They wrestled each other 32 times in 1948. The majority of them were singles matches, and every time Funk and Murdoch were matched up the building was full. Later I got to be good friends with Frankie's stepson Dick Murdoch. We played when we were kids. He always was a little asshole like I was, and we both ended up following in our father's footsteps as wrestlers. We would sit around in the arena while our fathers waited to get paid. It took an hour or so, because they had to count the house and figure it all up. We'd go around the arena and collect cups. Once we got around 50 cups all stacked up, we'd set them down one at a time and stomp them on the floor to make them pop. I learned a lot more about payoffs later. Here's what the honest cut of the gate was supposed to be: 10% came off the top for booking fees, then the rest was to be split, 45% to the promoter, 45% to the boys. All the promotional expenses were supposed to come out of the promoter's half, and the boys would split the other 45%, based on the promoter's discretion in regard to where on the card each guy wrestled. I started wrestling amateur style at Boys Ranch when I was 5 years old. My father brought a lot of the great pros to the ranch to show the kids on the wrestling team some techniques and pointers. Back then, almost all the pros could really wrestle.